sometimes instead of just being the parents watching the shows, maybe more of the community will come out and be more community thing instead of maybe just relatives.
More than 100 years ago, the community did come out. Operas, musicals, dance troupes all stopped in Junction City at one of the biggest theaters in Kansas, an opera house that reflected not only the artistic fever of a community, but the stubborn will to make a vision into a reality. In May of 1880, 75 Junction City residents, including the town's dramatic club, enjoyed an evening at the Bonebreaker Opera House in Abilene. In fact, they enjoyed it so much that within days of returning, they organized a meeting at the Bartell House to discuss the construction of an opera house in Junction City. A thriving town at the convergence of the Smoky Hill and Republican rivers, Junction City was one of the few large communities in Kansas without a public theater. Optimism ran high at the time, as noted in a Daily Union news story that declared that the project is feasible and there is money in it.
It was built in 1882, or started in 1880 actually. It began with a trip to a holiday trip to see the new opera house in Abilene by a group of Junction City citizens. And they came back with the desire to have a facility like that in Junction City. And they approached the city fathers about it, and very quickly they mounted a campaign to get bonds issued to build the building, and it just took off after that. Now they had some problems with the construction of the opera house initially. They had somebody challenge the legality of the bonds right away, and then they had the contractor that they had worked with died suddenly, and then before they could get the building completed, the tower fell in improper construction or something like that. They persisted through all of this and finally succeeded in opening their opera house.
The opera house was constructed with red brick in a Victorian style, with a steeple clock tower visible for miles around the city and beyond. The front of the building served as the city hall and fire station, with the city jail located in the basement. Entrance to the opera house was on the west side of the building on Jefferson Street. The interior was lighted by a large reflector with 60 gas burners suspended from the central ceiling. The stage on the south end was 20 feet deep and 62 feet wide. The scenery was created by a firm in St. Louis. The Daily Union declared in December of 1881 that the Opera House will undoubtedly be the handsomest in Kansas.
I think it'll be kind of cool because there'll be a lot of people and you can make them laugh and smile and stuff like that.
The fall that it opened, they held a Thanksgiving ball in here. I assume that at that time the seating was not fixed seating, so that they could get people in here, and they had a ball that brought people in from all over the community, all over the area.
On January 5, 1882, less than 2 years after that trip to Abilene, the Junction City Opera House opened with the Spanish drama Meralda, performed by the Junction City Dramatic Club. 5 days later, a second grand opening was held with the professional troupe, the Clayton Start Concert Company. As the Daily Union reported at the time, the Fort Riley Band would provide the music, and the audience will be large, fashionable, and tony.
And doing research for, and that was my father's high school graduation. There are a lot of articles about how they decorated the stage and how they planned the music and everything that went with it for that was for the high school graduations. Then when Governor Harvey died. He lived north of a military reservation, and they had his funeral at the Opera House. And so I wrote an article about that.
At 6 p.m. on a cold, snowy Friday in January of 1898, a few merchants and customers along West 7th Street heard 3 rings from the fire bell at the Opera House, and then nothing more.
The fire department was housed right here in this building. When the building was built, it was built as a combination city hall and opera house. And so the theater portion was in the back portion of the building. The front on 7th Street, those offices had the fire department on one side and the city hall on the other side.
When I passed my firemanship merit badge, I had to slide down that brass ring in the fire station there to get my firemanship merit badge.
The fire occurred in January of 1898. And it was in the evening, and the shops here on West 7th Street were just closing down when they heard the fire bell ring. Rang 3 times, and of course, as people walked out, they could see that there was fire. They didn't realize that it was actually an alarm. The reason it didn't sound any longer than that was the fire burned through the rope. One of the early residents of the community remembers standing across the street and seeing the snow come down and watching the tall clock fall in the tower, seeing that collapse. She writes very vividly about that. They had difficulty. They made an attempt to get in and try and contain the fire, but they were concerned that the walls would collapse. So all they could do was spray water on it from the outside. They think it started up in the fly gallery where the scenery was kept and ran right along the roof line.
The fire was devastating for the community. The firemen at the scene did all they could to prevent the blaze from spreading to adjacent businesses, including the White Lumber Yard. Portions of 3 walls had fallen down, leaving only the front wall salvageable. Yet within days, the City Council voted in a special session to rebuild what had become a very important part of the community.
Didn't take very long. It was before, I think it was in the same week that the fire occurred, that the people determined that they wanted to reconstruct the Opera House. And they immediately set out on a fundraising campaign to gather support from merchants and community leaders and citizens, and they gathered the money, had reconstructed the building in 9 months, and had it ready to open again in October of 1898. They did it a little differently than they had the first time. They kept the red brick remains of the front portion of the building, and so the City Hall portion of the building was red brick, and the Opera House, or the theater portion of the building, they did out of the native limestone. And of course this time it was local construction people, Ziegler and Dalton, that did the building, and it was they used local materials.
The bigger the audience, the more exciting it gets. You want to go on stage and you're not scared, you just want to go out there.
Not only did the outside of the Opera House change, but the inside was changed as well.
Very, very elegant for its day. There were columns of theater boxes on either side of the stage. There was 3 on each side, went up 3 levels. There was a balcony, and the floor here had fixed seating in it. And then they had seating around a second balcony and then a third balcony. It probably wouldn't meet with fire code at all the way it is today, but it was very elegant for the time. And then there was a smoking balcony out over the porte cochere that went out over the theater entrance that was on 7th Street. It was a large, very large stage, had over 100 pieces of stock scenery that was painted by a company up in Omaha, Nebraska, as well as a grand drape that had a gorgeous scene on it that was the pride of the community. And there was an orchestra pit, 10 dressing rooms, all kind, running water. For 1898, they had running water in the dressing rooms.
The new Opera House attracted national traveling bands and musicals, as well as plays and, of course, operas. It rapidly resumed its role as a centerpiece of the local community.
John Philip Sousa was here in 1904 with his band. George M. Cohen, back in those early days when he was traveling with his parents as the Cohen family, they did a stint here. Uncle Tom's Cabin was performed here often, and it's interesting to read the reviews in the newspaper for the various productions. Some of them were good, some of them were panned big time. Another night, or another play of the day that was very popular was 10 Nights in a Barroom, or The Face on the Barroom Floor, you know, some of those kind of things. In addition to that, they produced the Grand Opera Faust, was one of those touring companies that came through here. Opera was often performed here. People tend to think of the Opera House as a place that opera was only performed at. That was not so. An opera house was a place where was just the name for the theater, but opera was performed here.
In my day, little girls took music lessons, piano, or they took dancing, and I was fortunate when I took dancing. And they always had a recital, a piano recital or a dancing recital. And I think I was about 6 years old when they had a dancing recital at the Opera House. And why it is so vivid in my mind is because my godmother, who was Mrs. Mike Fry, he was postmaster of Junction City, had somebody bring me a basket of flowers after I did my solo. So you can imagine what an impression that made on a little girl to have flowers delivered at the front of the stage after I danced. My next most vivid one was when I was about 8 or 9. I'm still dancing, and I wore a sailor suit. The first one I wore a little pink fluffy dress with a pink silk parasol, which would be typical of a little 6 or 7 year old child. And I was about 8 or 9 maybe then, and I wore a sailor suit, full regalia, hat, everything white. And I can remember vividly bringing out a flag out of my pocket up on my chest and dancing around the stage with that silk flag. Now I'm going to be very patriotic, and I never dropped the flag. I either gave it to somebody off stage or I put it in the pocket. But I did cartwheels off of the stage, which just killed the whole audience. Children didn't do things like that. There was no gymnastics or anything in dancing. I can remember the whole summer spending my time with my mother saying, you have to practice, you have to work on these cartwheels. And I did cartwheels off the stage. So those were 2 very vivid early memories.
So, of course, the thing I remember the most was we came in from the side and we'd go out the front, and I went around the corner and I fell down. So I was really the star of the show.
Well, of course, as children, with all these children in a recital, we were running all over that opera house. We were in the boxes and we were down below. I don't remember, at one time they had horses there, but I don't remember that at all. But I remember they had fire equipment down there. And then I can remember running around down there, and we went underneath the stage and out the door that went into the pit. And you know, those are things that as a child you remember.
I remember my dad was in a womanless wedding where a lot of the people in town dressed up and portrayed a wedding, and my dad was an usher or something. I don't know what it was, but he was in that thing. And I remember that at the Opera House.
The movies, and especially the advent of talkies, changed the Opera House. Fewer and fewer traveling musical companies were booked, until large-scale professional theater in communities like Junction City were silenced for the remainder of the century.
When I was in about high school, I was going into high school, my dad, I can just see him downtown talking to the man saying, you know, this opera house is open here, nobody's using it, and why don't we use it for something? He says, I'll rent it, I'll have a movie theater there, because we only have 2. And he said, it's going to be cheap. He says, I'm going to have 10 cents a person to go in. And so that was another time that I was able to run all over the opera house and see what was going on.
Actually, they showed movies here from about 1918, actually about 1915 on. You know, they showed silent films in here, and at the same time it still operated as a legitimate theater, and they had, you know, touring companies and vaudeville and things like that that were here on certain nights of the week, and then other nights they showed movies here. And then it was converted totally to movies after World War I.
As long as I've been in Junction City, it's always just been a boarded up building, and I haven't noticed anything. And I think it's really cool. It's actually going to be something now.
Well, in the 1940s, when the municipal building, shortly after the municipal building was built, the Opera House was gutted. What happened was the contractor for the municipal building project, this was again during the Depression, and the city made a trade with him, and he acquired the Opera House and the community house in trade for some of the work that was done on the municipal building. For a time he used it as a storage facility for building materials and things like that, and then I don't know whether he gutted it or whether it was gutted by the theater people who, I think it was Dickinson Theater people that came in and acquired it after that. It had sat empty for a number of years, but they restructured it to be a movie theater, and so all of the old elements, interior elements, were taken out at that time.
In the 50s and 60s, it was a movie theater, colonial theater, and it operated that way up until the early 80s when they built new theaters out on the west side of town.
In the 1960s and 70s, the national wave of interest in historic treasures included efforts in Junction City to not only save the Opera House, but to restore its place as the community's cultural centerpiece. In its last years as a movie theater, the Opera House had fallen into disrepair. The roof leaked so badly that it is said that buckets were installed under cracks in the rafters to catch water. The carpet became frayed and dirty. Toilets were cracked. The porte-cochere, a now forgotten sign of its cultural heritage, had long been bricked in, as were many of the windows.
It was in the early 1960s, I think, when they started talking about rebuilding it, and we had a lot of rather enthusiastic people that remembered it and were very interested in seeing it restored.
I always have, the things I remember as a kid was always wondering why were those doors blocked up. You could tell that there are curvy doors on the west side of the building, but they're always full of stone. And you always say, well, why did they fill in those doorways full of stone? And the entrance to the theater was always on the north. And it looked kind of like it would have been neat to have been able to go in on the west and see what was there. And even now I look at the stage door on the back and wonder how that was used in the time.
At the time that the effort first came to acquire the Opera House by the concerned citizens that were for preservation of it and development of it, the Opera House had been purchased by Fred Bramlage and donated back to the city as a home for the little theater and possibly for use as a convention center. And he had done the same thing basically with the old high school building. He had purchased that and donated it to the Historical Society as a museum. And I think he probably had a little bit of a vision of some of this, what could be accomplished. But that was as far as it went until a group of citizens made an effort to see it developed.
Mr. Bramlage, when he donated the it back to the city really didn't know what to do with it. When Donna Lundeen and her group came forward and said, well, we've got a plan, and if you allow us to lease the building as the Opera House Foundation, we'll take it off your hands, I think they jumped at it.
Mr. Bramlage then gave the Opera House back to the city in about 1980, 82 or something like that. And the city did some maintenance on it, re-roofed it, obviously wanted to renovate the building but didn't have the funds, so they leased it for a number of years to the Opera House Foundation. And this was a group of citizens in town that raised funds, and they did some renovation to it.
As young people, that facility was wonderful to us, and we saw it deteriorating, and it really bothered us. And because of our love for it, we decided we wanted to be part of getting it back in operation again.
We actually started out as a group of people that was interested in saving it from being, it was going to be torn down. And as we thought it would be, and make a parking lot out of it. And so we got together and we started the Opera House Foundation, just a group of us, and trying to do chili feeds, everything under the sun, you name it, we tried it to make money, and it just wasn't happening because we knew that we couldn't do it. And so the president of the Opera House Foundation at that time was Donna Lundeen. So we kind of decided and made a motion in our group that we would turn it over to the city.
I think it'd be really fun because you get to do a lot of different plays and have a lot of more people and be up on stage on a different stage. I think that'd be pretty cool.
2 or 3 years ago, the city manager had the idea to do a big fundraising effort, and they've been doing that for a year and a half or 2 years, raising money, and then put the Opera House on the historical register, so it had funds through the state and the federal government, and finally got the level of funding that we needed to actually renovate the Opera House.
Our family goes back 4 generations in this community, and we like history, so I think it'd be neat to have one of the old buildings that has character restored. I feel the same. I think the courthouse is the other central place in the town, and I don't like the way the main street looks where it's covered up. Some of the older buildings of character, and I like the ones that are making an attempt to try to restore it back to the late 1800s. I think maybe Junction City's ready for it to rise again from the ash, if you will, with new military expansion at the fort and trying to find ways to be a community for those people that will be living on the fort and those that choose to live in this community. And so it probably can be a center of that action.
We've had an architect go through and do the plans that we were looking at back here to renovate it back into a facility that could be used for primarily live performances. First Management is a contractor that will go in and totally demolish the theater, the movie theater type things that were done, you know, take out the lobby and of course remove all the old stuff that's in there, and then they will begin to renovate it back into something similar to the original building.
We'll pick up people that are coming through here on the way to Denver and shows and the like, and put them on, and it'll be a great asset to the town.
The balcony will be completely changed. It'll be moved forward from what it is today. There'll be a brand new opening on the Jefferson Street side, which goes back to the original entrance to the building. It'll have the porte-cochere that has the area that you can stand on top of it if you'd want to. We won't be doing that, but we're opening up all the windows that you see blocked over on the outside of the building, so you'll see the original windows that were there. The front of the building, you'll come in and it'll actually be divided into the theater, which will seat about 455 people. The front part of the building, which served as the city hall for years, will be a reception area, so that a wide open area that you can have meet and greets, or you can have wedding receptions, or you could even just have gatherings before a production or after production there in that particular area. As I was showing Mr. E.J. Rolfson, he has been a pivotal figure in this too, as he donated the building adjacent to this. And that was key, because that means all the support mechanisms that go with the theater can be done in that building, and then that leaves the space in this building not only for the theater seats, but for reception area and for the stage.
I think Junction City, and we live here, and so we just kind of get used to it. But I think if you drive around the state and look at communities, we've really been able to keep buildings that are nice, historic buildings, and maintain that. And I think that's something that Junction City needs to build on. And the Opera House, like you say, is kind of a cornerstone for that historic type thing. So I think it's wonderful.
I can always say 2 words: stage fright.
As a native of this area, then I can recall the Opera House being kind of an eyesore in my childhood. And for the most part, it's been closed since I've been around the area. And so I just remember all the various times where they were trying to save the building, and just never understanding that process as a kid. And now being able to be on the side of helping to get the door open it's a special experience. It'll just be a top-notch facility from the outside, and still be a historic theater. And then on the inside, it'll be, while it's historic looking on the outside, it won't be as historic looking on the inside. It'll be a state-of-the-art facility with all the amenities of today. And so being able to provide a larger facility for community events, as well as being able to provide a state-of-the-art facility to bring in outside events as well. And I think it'll enhance the quality of life for the citizens here, be able to participate in things that probably wouldn't have been able to be brought here, at least not for a reasonable cost.
And so here we are in this historic building that is beginning a new chapter in its life. Some of its secrets were revealed during the renovation: the graffiti on the walls and the remains of the fire buried under the stage. But these relics and the stories shared about the Opera House are not just memories. They reveal what it means to be from a place like Junction City, what it means to have cultural roots and community tradition. We salute the vision of our city's leaders in the 1880s and their tenacity when faced with the heart-rending fire that came just a few years later. And today, we thank the new visionaries whose dedication to a dream has finally come to this great opera house. By preserving this building, we have been given the opportunity to pass those values on to new generations and new citizens, and to give respect to our history, its traditions, customs, and people. In this sesquicentennial year, we have honored this community's past and made a commitment to its future.
Chairs were in there, and I have kind of rather a unique story to tell you about those chairs. There were some ladies who had a dress shop here, and they were called the Reiser sisters, and they all had their father was the first mayor of Junction City, Robert Reiser, and so they were esteemed people in the community. And after I was married and living here, one day one of the Reiser ladies called me up and asked me if I'd come down and see her. They wanted to tell me some things and show me some things. So that was just fine. I went down there one afternoon, and they were going around their house, which is down here in Chestnut and Adams, and they were showing some different tables and different chairs, and they said, now this table we had in our shop, and this one really should go to your husband George, because it came from the Governor Harvey family, and I think Governor Harvey was about the second or third governor of Kansas, so he went back a long ways. And she said, this really ought to go to you. And then she was showing some other things, not to me, but to my husband, because the Harveys had been really good friends of the Grammars. And then I looked over, and in the corner was this little gold chair. And I said, where did that chair come from? And she said, it came from the Opera House. And I was so excited. Here was a gilt chair, a small gilt chair, and came out of one of the boxes. And every so often when I drive down, which when I go downtown, I go by their house, it flickers through my mind. I wonder what happened to that little gold chair. I wanted to tell her, you know, I'd love to have that, but you know, you couldn't have done that. But what she wanted to give me was a walking stick that had belonged to Governor Harvey, a hand-carved walking stick, which after my husband died, I took it down and gave it to the museum because it should go in some place like that where it's cared for. And that's what she really wanted to give to me. But I really would like to have had that little gold chair.